Welcome to episode 115 of Nobody Special.
In this episode, we talk about the Sermon on the Mount with Dr. Pennington.
All right, hold on. Stop the music. Here's the deal. Dr. Jonathan Pennington is a very smart man, smarter than both of us combined times two. And we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount. So it would be very helpful, and you should do it. Just open up your Bible, read Matthew 5, 6, and 7. It's a quick read, and then come back and then play this. And not just because that gives us 2 download views.
The Gospel Outpost presents Nobody Special.
Hey everybody, welcome to Nobody Special, 2 Nobodies talking about the somebody who matters. I'm Danny, the host and not special guest of Nobody Special.
And I'm Caleb, you're the host of Nobody Special. This is a podcast where 2 generations of people talk about God, pop culture, politics, and everything in between, all while not taking any of it too seriously.
Caleb, we normally do banter here, but I don't care today.
Yeah, we have a guest.
I have a special guest in today. It is an actual treat. Dr. Pennington is joining us today. Hey, please give us a hi. Tell us how everything's going.
Hey, it's great. Glad to be with you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dr. Pennington is coming out of Kentucky. Is that right?
Louisville, Kentucky. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And is check this out. So there's a lot of things here. The associate professor of New Testament and the director of research of doctoral studies at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and has published a few books, and I've gone through a few of them, and actually challenged me during a graduate school also.
He's also the associate pastor of preaching for Sojourn Church East. Is that right? And very awesome author. I know Danny loves your books, and
they're great. I actually I was exposed to them in a graduate class. It was the Gospel of Matthew and the. I'm sorry.
I would say it had a big impact on you, obviously.
Sorry. I've gone through like 5 different books, but I did just plow through the Sermon on the Mount book. It was absolutely fantastic. It's a great book, and it's cool to kind of be able to dig in, a 300-page book on essentially 2 chapters of the gospel, but it's a profound 2 chapters. And so, I know that as far as podcasting goes, there's also a podcast that comes out. I think it's coming back in 2 weeks. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll have another episode coming out here pretty soon. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Cars, Coffee, and Theology. And so that's I love the style of the show, driving around, going to get coffee, talking. And I know, well, first, just tell us what it's about, why you like doing it.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, the inspiration was originally Seinfeld, and there's no trying to hide that. Such an enjoyable show that a lot of us have watched over the last few years. But as I watch that, I always think of what Austin Kleon says. I don't know if you've read Austin Kleon's book about Steal Like an Artist. Sorry, I lost the title. Steal Like an Artist. Everything we create as sub-creators is really a mashup of other things. There's nothing really new under the sun, but I'm happy to honor Seinfeld's original inspiration. But as I watched that show, I realized, it really brings, I thought I could do something like this that is really just for my own pleasure. And then I would just share it with others, because a big part of my life is actually, I'm very privileged to have very close friends with a lot of scholars all over the place. And just, I love talking to interesting intellectual people about, especially the Christian faith. And I love drinking really good coffee, and I love my old sports car. And I thought, why not just combine these things? There's kind of a genre that's out there, and it's fun. And so it's really just 3 things I love mashed up together, like a good guacamole. And, And then I thought, why not just, I do these kind of things anyways. I drive around with people and I walk with people a lot. Why not just kind of share them? So it's, it's been a ton of fun, thanks to a good friend of mine who served as the producer for the first season. He really made it happen because of all the audio and production side of it. That's a lot more involved than people would realize. And then my daughter, who's a musician, and you may hear her on the jingle at the beginning, and also as an audio engineer, she has taken over the production of the show now for the second season, and keeps me going.
Right.
Everything. So yeah, it's a total joy. It's just an opportunity for me to talk with interesting people about the Bible and Scripture and their own scholarship, and yeah, it's fun. So check it out on YouTube, Cars Coffee Theology.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I've gone through, I think, all of those once or twice. It's a phenomenal kind of a podcast, and it's got some pretty big people in there as far as being able to pick their brains. And I'm also, it's cool to talk to these people, but as people, because a good amount of times people think they're these academics that they think on deep thoughts and drive clouds in to go to the office, and that's it. But in actuality, they're people, they get coffee, they get Starbucks, and I mean, that's a personality test there, is figuring out the type of coffee they drink. Yeah. So
yeah, that's part of it. I want to reveal these people as just real people too. You know, I mean, I want to talk about their ideas, but they're just real people, you know.
Right. And everyone carries a first car that they drove, and it's like, it tried to kill them at some point, you know? So yeah.
Yeah. And I know that obviously you enjoy coffee. It's in the title of the show. I gotta know, what is your favorite style of making coffee, whether it's at home with the Chemex, just a normal coffee machine, pour over? What is it?
Just right before we got on, I just made a V60. I don't need a whole Chemex at home, but a V60 of an Ethiopian Yirgacheffe from Quills. So I used to roast beans at home and make it a lot at home, but in Louisville, we have such excellent coffee. We have two really excellent award-winning, national award-winning roasteries and shops, Quills Coffee and Sooner Goss. They're both amazing. And so between that and at my office, we make a couple of Chemexes a day. I kind of gotten out of the habit of making coffee at home, and I certainly don't need to roast my beans anymore because I can just buy really excellent beans. Right. And so it's been the quarantine that's got me making coffee at home again, because I used to just go to coffee shops all the time or have it at work. So so I've just made some.
Fancy, nice, yeah.
I use Folgers. I get it. Yeah. Like
Danny's the.
I know. I'm working on it. Or not Folgers, an off-brand that isn't.
He claims it takes too much time, which it is true. If you don't have the time, it's kind of hard. But I like waking up and just taking your time to do. I do pour over personally at home, but
that's what this was. This is a pour over.
Yeah, it's very delicious coffee. Yeah.
I've been told it tastes different. I don't know. I guess I'm just not there yet. I'm working on it. So
it's acquired taste buds, Danny.
I'm working on it.
This is a better palate.
I tend to do the coffee that's on sale that week. So that's yeah. Now, to jump into the Sermon on the Mount, there's the entire book, I've already plugged it. I'm going to plug it again. It's a fantastic book. Go pick it up. How to distill that book down into just kind of a soundbite is very, very tricky, but I know that a big part of it is understanding that this is an explanation of instead of people being blessed, it's flourishing in a particular, or to the Beatitudes. And that's a big difference that I think a ton of people, they push back on that as far as, going through it in church and that kind of thing. That's a big cultural a change as far as the wording on that. Why propose that change, and what difference does that carry in the meaning?
Well, if I might step back, maybe pull up another 10,000 feet, it might be helpful to approach it, just to kind of think about what I'm trying to do in this book. That's all right with you guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the book is half, it's split in half. The first half is sort of how to read the Sermon on the Mount. And then the second half is a commentary, a very theological commentary that reads the text, sensitive to its theological themes. And the reason I wrote the book is because I was teaching so I'm a Matthew scholar. That's my kind of main area of study, and I've done a lot of work in Matthew. And then about 10 or 12 years ago, I started teaching a class on the Sermon on the Mount, thinking, well, I know something about Matthew. I must know something about the sermon. I quickly realized I knew nothing about the sermon and didn't realize what a massively important text. In the history of the church, the Sermon on the Mount has been, from the first centuries of the church on, the single most commented upon, preached upon, taught upon, written upon text of all the Bible. I mean, it's really, it would not be a mistake to recognize the Sermon on the Mount as probably the single most influential section of the Bible. That even includes comparing it with Romans and things like that, because in the whole span of the history of the church, for sure, the sermon is central. So I quickly began to realize, wow, I've got to figure out what's going on here. And the more I studied it, the more amazed I was at its beauty and artistry, and depth and the ideas. And basically what motivated me to write the book is that as I was teaching on it and coming to discover things, and talking to students about it, I kept hearing from people, you've got to write this stuff down, because this isn't the way I've been taught to read the sermon. And the short story of it is, I think what I think is going on in the sermon is that it is part of Matthew's presentation of Jesus as the true wisdom of the world, or the great philosopher, the truest philosopher of the world, who is God, King, Savior. He's all those things, but he's also a teacher. And that's Matthew's big idea. And what does he teach? He teaches humanity how to find true life. Maybe John 10:10 is a good way to sum it up. I've come that you might have life and might have it abundantly. And that's where that idea of human flourishing comes in, to recognize that is what God is about. He is about restoring humanity to our state of shalomness, and that's the end game of the Bible, is that we might be restored to fullness of humanity, to fullness of joy, peace, contentment. And the Greek people had a lot of words for this, but one of the main ones is eudaimonia, which we translate as flourishing, or basically a synonym with that was the word makarios, which means, again, flourishing, basically. Comparable to the Old Testament word asher or ashrei, which means the same thing. And one of the things that I discovered as I was working in the Sermon on the Mount was that the way it starts, which is what you're talking about, the Beatitudes, the way we translate that first section of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:3-12, we translate it with 9. That's the same word 9 times, and we usually translate it with the word blessed. But I came to realize, after beating my head against the Greek text for many years, and thinking about the English language, that's not what that word means. That the Greek word there, makarios, does not mean blessed in the English sense. It means happy or flourishing in this shalom, asher, eudaimonia sense. And so it took a while. I mean, it was years of thinking about how to. I literally spent about 5 years trying to think about how to translate that word, just that alone, in light of other things too. And I just came to realize that the whole Sermon on the Mount is about Jesus teaching what the true nature of life, abundant life, not in a kind of health and wealth craziness at all, but including suffering and brokenness, but true happiness and true flourishing. And that's what the Sermon on the Mount is really all about.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of putting it as blessed, it almost pitched it as an exchange between God and people, that is, if I do this, then I am blessed. And that's kind of, it isn't claiming that. It's claiming that because I do this, I am in a state of being blessed. Kinda. I mean, to an extent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things
that's a really clunky translation. So
it is. It's hard to translate. And that's what I found, is that the Christian tradition, some people, and I talk about this a couple places in the book, and there's a whole chapter, as on the word makarios and how to translate it.
Right.
In the Christian tradition, some people, you're right, would read the Beatitudes like, well, if I do these things, then God will bless me.
Right.
Another tradition, and maybe especially Protestants talk this way, would say, no, it can't mean, it's not formulaic. So it just must mean that we are given grace, and when we live that way according to that grace, then we get more blessings. Well, those are nice ideas. That's just not what a macrism is. What a is a statement of Makariosness, is an invitation to learn to see the world in a different way and then to live in the world in a different way, because that alone promises the happiness we long for, the flourishing we long for. And so Jesus is inviting people, as he says in chapter 11 later on, to take his yoke upon us and to learn his ways, to become disciples, because his way of discipleship promises the fullness of life that we long for. And so that how a Macarism works, how a Makarios statement works, is a beatitude works, is it's not giving us a set of demands, nor is it just kind of giving this after the fact extra blessing. It's saying adopt a whole way of seeing and being, because they're alone in life. So
absolutely, it's if I'm understanding it, it's a tapping into the way God intended things to be. It's kind of a state of type of understanding of it, that people that are poor in spirit, they are tapping into the future promises of the kingdom of heaven. And I mean, that it was a great comparison, that it is talking about the day to day, but it's talking about the day to day in the context of a part of going into everything else. It's the everyday, and or kind of the difficult concept is the now, not a yet understanding. And that's always been really difficult to explain to people, the now, not a yet, but that our promises start at this point and carry on into eternity.
Yeah. It's actually super interesting because, that we're talking about this, because the church I go to, we're actually going through a series on the Sermon on the Mount currently. So, and this is my first time kind of really being exposed to it when I am actually trying to intentionally pursue God, if that makes sense. Like before, when I was younger, I mean, I'm still really young, but like, it wasn't an active thing, but wanting to learn more. And so actually trying to understand what the Sermon on the Mount is, besides it just being, a thing that you hear about and, brushed off as that, it's pretty crazy. And like you said, it's a huge turning point in the Bible. And so, one question I had though, specifically, because I haven't been to seminary, of course, but I'm just here to, learn, how do we distinguish when it's just Matthew's interpretation, or how much it is, truly Jesus saying those things? So like, what would you say to that? Like, as far as translation of Matthew being the one that's portraying what Jesus is saying?
Yeah, that's a fair question. All history retelling is interpretive, interpreted even. I mean, every time you go to retell some event or repeat some teaching, there's a very complex intellectual process of what we might call selection and deselection and crafting. That doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that there's the necessity when we humans communicate with each other about the past that we narrativize it and we deselect material that's irrelevant. So the example I give to my students regularly is like, if you were to go home at the end of a day and your spouse or friend asks you, how was your day? Well, you're not going to hopefully take 8 hours to go through every moment of what happened. You're going to shorten it, hopefully, quite a bit. And some are better at this than others. And little children have not learned this yet, that you have to deselect most of the material.
Dear goodness, they have not. Yeah.
And then imagine that over a week or 3 weeks or 3 years. If you're 3 years, there's going to be a whole bunch of recrafting of the material, even rechronologizing it by theme a lot of times, if you start paying attention to your own retelling of history. Now, of course, you could lie, but I'm assuming that you're being faithful. And even within faithful storytelling, faithful history retelling, there's a whole bunch of interpretation that goes on. And what the early church understood this is what ancient historians understood. This is what they thought about ancient historiography being. And what they really valued is what we should value, is that the people that are deeply invested in the truthfulness of the events are the people that are actually most reliable to give us an interpretation of what happened. Now, it's very different than modern jurisprudence where we have a bias against witnesses. In the ancient world, they recognized the value of testimony because only those who were deeply invested in the events can have an insider perspective on their significance and meaning, right? If all you're trying to get is the bare facts, then, which is impossible anyways, but if you're trying to just get bare facts that are free of any interpretation, which again is not really possible, then I suppose some kind of objectivity might be acquired through a non-invested witness. But if you actually want to know what the significance of something is and what the meaningfulness of something is, you need invested witnesses. And so from the early stages of the church, they understood that the four gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were eyewitness testimony. They were testimony that either came directly as from disciples or they were from disciples of disciples, in the case of Luke being a disciple of Paul and Mark being a disciple of Peter. And that's why those are probably in the middle, bookended by the bigger gospels in terms of direct witness, Matthew and John. But all four of them are testimonies to the events. So they involve interpretation. So Matthew is Matthew's presentation of the truthfulness of Jesus. And it's going to be different than Mark's and Luke's and John's, even though they're not contradictory, but they are going to be distinct. And so we don't have to be afraid to say, yeah, this is Matthew's interpretation of Jesus. I think it's a faithful interpretation. I believe it's an inspired interpretation by the Spirit, but it is an interpretation. And so what we're doing when we're reading the Gospels is we're trying to listen to the voice of the witness. We're not trying to get behind Matthew to reconstruct an historical Jesus. We're actually trying to say, what has God inspired Matthew to teach us about Jesus? And I think that's a really helpful perspective.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, like that's something, that has really, that I've seen is the four gospels, right? In all of their interpretations. That's something that's been encouraging to me, is seeing that they all line up. And even like statistically, when stories don't line up, or I can't remember, it was back in high school when someone told me this, but when stories line up, it is a lot of the times going to be true. That is the actual thing that occurred. So that's interesting that you're saying, like you said, they don't contradict, but it's different interpretations. That is very interesting.
Yeah. And especially a structure of the Sermon on the Mount, the way it builds to the Lord's Prayer and then talks about everything it talked about at the beginning. It kind of, I mean, as I've been taught this, and to be honest, I haven't been through a ton of teachings going through, phrase at a time on it. And I was pleased to go through this book that just goes like, all right, I'm unpacking this a verse at a time. Let's go. But because people tend to just kind of pick and choose the different areas, and especially during everybody in quarantine, the amount of messages that have been taught on don't be anxious are pretty high up there, and they're great. Also, though, it's part of a bigger picture,
right?
And part of that picture is this tension between, I think, kind of the flesh and the giving up of the flesh to an eternal mind in perspective. Is that kind of a fair distinction going on there? I mean, it is talking about a day-to-day ethic, but it is also talking about a ton of stuff that's pretty counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's interesting. Matthew doesn't use that language of flesh. That's more Pauline way of speaking.
Yeah.
In fact, Matthew doesn't even talk about the Spirit very much. But I think if you want to analogize it to Paul's metaphors of flesh and spirit, which are deep biblical metaphors too,
right?
Not Matthew's metaphors, but it is comparable in the sense that I think the key is what you said. It's very counterintuitive. Many of the things that Jesus encourages us, the yoke he encourages us to take upon him, seems very unnatural. To turn the other cheek, to be a peacemaker, meaning that you give up your rights instead of demanding justice, being humble, having a poverty of spirit, hungry and thirsting. That's not a positive image. That means you feel the brokenness of the world and you're longing for God to come and set the world to right, hungry and thirsty for righteousness.
Right.
That's all very counterintuitive, but that's exactly the point, is that Jesus's way, if we'll adopt his way of seeing and being, we'll find life, surprisingly, even in the midst of suffering and pain and loss. And I think that's at the heart of the message of the sermon in the New Testament, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I've never personally stared at a person being persecuted for their faith and thought that person's really flourishing. But I think that's the idea of all of this is going, all right, there's a bigger thing than all of us, that the people that are being persecuted, most of the time they're fine. And they're going like, yeah, no, I'm totally fine. Like, I have God, so I don't really need anything else. So, they can persecute me, but, well, to a fair amount of people though, that's a pretty difficult bridge to cross over. So what kind of barriers do you think there are in getting people to kind of give up the flesh in order to step into this kind of a flourishing lifestyle?
What are the barriers? Well, the flesh.
One probably,
and the devil in the world.
Right.
You need to taste and see that the Lord is good. As you step towards being a disciple, then you understand what it means to be a disciple. There's no way you can understand anything apart from doing it. This is one of the many problems with modern epistemology, or modern how we know ideas of what it means to know, is that we've made knowing a cognitive process that's disconnected from our bodies and our practice. But in reality, knowing biblically and throughout most of human history was understood to be something that is deeply embodied and habituated. It's not just this Descartes kind of idea that your mind is separate from your body.
Right.
But knowing is kind of like knowing how to play badminton or drive a stick shift, or any other kind of things that involves practice, and it involves a deepening understanding as you do it. Well, that's what discipleship is like. You can't really know that what Jesus says is true until you actually live in his way. But as you live in his way, you come to see it. And so, again, the Gospel of John, the way he talks about this, one of the main themes in John is this idea of come and see. Just go back and read the first couple of chapters of John. He's constantly, and Jesus is saying to people, and other disciples are like Nathaniel and others saying, come and see, come and see.
Right.
And the woman at the well, come and see, right? All these people are saying, come and see. And that becomes like a metaphor for our whole lives, that you have to come and know it by doing it. And then you'll know that this is the way of happiness. So.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, that's something that I've thought about a lot because a good example is I see, people who are older than me, and, whether I'll just give my grandpa as an example, and he has such a great relationship with God and is in the Word, and he has like that true desire to be in the Word and to be praying for people and all this stuff. And I wish that I could just jump there, but the more and more I try and do that, I realize that it takes time and it's not possible to just jump there. And I feel like that's part of what you're saying is like sanctification is the process to not only become more like God, but once we grow closer to him, the more we know about him. And that's where that desire comes in, is once we know more, we know the reasons why, what he's doing for us. And it stirs that desire. And so like, that's been something I've thought about a lot over the past year. So that's super interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Well, in the last chapter of the book, I try to address some of these issues of what the relationship of grace and virtue, because when I talk about habituation, I'm really talking about virtue, being trained to be a certain way in the world. And so I wrestle with kind of some of these issues of how that relates to grace. And I think they certainly are compatible. But one of the things I talk about in chapter 12 of the book is that, we are right to say that the Bible teaches that as we are, so we do. So the kind of fruit tree we are is the kind of fruit we'll bear. And that's absolutely true. But it's also true at the same time that as we do, so we become. And that's the part you're talking about there, and I was talking about as well, that as we live certain ways, we grow into those ways. And it's really important that we keep both of those aspects of our human existence together. And unfortunately, a lot of times we only emphasize one or the other.
Right.
And you need both of them in balance. That we what we do is a fruit of who we are. So we need to pay attention to that, but also, changing the metaphor, the ways we walk shape us to be a certain kind of person. And
Sure.
you've got to let those be. They don't square up with each other. You have to let them both be realities that are dealing with different realms. And that's what we call an antinomy, two ideas that formally are contradictory, but actually live together. And the paradox of them together is the truth. And all the most important things in life are antinomies. They are these paradoxical truths. And I think that's an example of a pair as well. Right.
I mean, there's almost this aspect of it that it's to jump into these. I mean, because a fair amount of these are pretty difficult things to do and pretty difficult changes. I mean, as Jesus is preaching it, it's a pretty big kind of a change that he's preaching, to actually care about our enemies. I've never seen anyone get excited like, I get to go care for my enemies today. It's going to be great.
Yep.
It's this changing of a perspective, but that comes by a faith in trusting that, hey, this to me totally stinks, but I'm trusting that out of this there is an intention that God carries in crafting it in this type of a manner. And I mean, it's a fair amount of time that our understanding catches up to scripture, because a lot of studies that come out on people that are angry all the time, well, that actually ends up damaging a fair amount of things. And it's almost as if God's going like, yeah, no, I know, like I told you. But a faith is it comes prior to the knowledge, if it even brings the knowledge. I mean, the knowledge is almost not as important as the faith. Kind of.
Everything's a both and.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And now, as far as the a word choice between flourishing and being blessed and all that, I know another option. It was a person that's going through this. They're kind of at not joyful, but they're pleased to go through it, or kind of it's difficult to understand flourishing a bit of being in this context that they're doing these things and are flourishing. And so if there's a definition of flourishing,
there's the reality. There's no good translation. And I just came up with, after literally 5 or 6 years of thinking about that particular word.
Right.
And I came up with the best one. It doesn't work in every case, but what we have to realize, that's because of translation. That's the nature of translation, is that you can never, words do not equal each other, even in one language. Like, there's no such thing as an actual synonym. If you think about it, there's no two words that share the complete same semantic space, right? They all have slightly different nuances and evocations. But when you transfer across languages, and especially across cultures as diverse as modern American versus ancient Greek influenced Jewish culture, there's a lot of difference. And so you can expect that the translations are always going to be imperfect, right? It doesn't mean we can't read our English Bibles. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I don't think that, I mean, flourishing is good. I think it's better than blessed, because I think on the cost benefit analysis, it's better than blessed, but I don't think it's perfect. And especially, like flourishing are the ones persecuted. That seems odd, but then again, what I think's good about it is that I think it pushes us to reconsider the nature of true happiness. And that is what Jesus is doing. I mean, I think even in Jesus' day, the Beatitudes that he gave would have been shocking. Because what you expect them to say is flourishing is the one who has many children, and flourishing the ones whose crops are all wonderful, and flourishing are the ones who has many friends. And instead he says flourishing are the poor in spirit, and flourishing are the humble, and flourishing are the ones who are persecuted because of righteousness. So even in Jesus' day, they're shocking statements. And so I don't mind that it seems odd to us, because I think it should kind of pry open some of our expectations as well.
Right.
I think that's what he's doing. So
Sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know my pastor in the sermon series, he actually used bless. So it's cool to hear the other side of that and your reasoning behind that.
I'll read the book. It's not too late.
I know. I need to actually, he just finished it and he's been, telling me I need to read through it. So I might actually pick it up because
it's going over there next.
Yeah.
So. And now as far as the bulk of the sermon though, I mean, probably the biggest problem that I go through going through this is I can't get more than 2-3 verses in and not understand like, oh yeah, this is unattainable. And that's, it's incredible, or to do everything in there is very difficult. I mean, even chapter 5 is very difficult. Even the first part is very difficult. And then as he goes into 5:20, that I need to be even more perfect than the Pharisees, and thinking through, it's like, all right, they did all the proper things, and I have to exceed that. Is it's intentional, because I think positive Jesus understood the thing he's speaking, but man, it's quite an amount of pressure.
Well, I hope
to exceed that. Yeah.
The chapter on the word teleos and the commentary, that you understand what my answer to that is going to be.
Oh, absolutely.
You're absolutely right. And we're supposed to feel that. But the issue is, so if the Sermon on the Mount is about, it's asking the question, what is the nature of true happiness? The answer to it is what you're just talking about, and that is wholeness. Right. So the answer is that our righteousness, so Matthew 5:20, our righteousness that needs to surpass that of the scribes and Pharisees, means that it's a wholeness between our outer lives and our inner lives, or our behavior and our hearts.
Right.
So the big theme throughout the sermon, that's the answer to the question of the Beatitudes, is wholeness. So how do you experience true happiness? How do you experience true flourishing? You have to have a heart that is attuned to God and his coming kingdom, not just an external behavior. External behavior matters too, because as you do, so you become, right? But the Pharisees' problem, they become the big enemies, because the Pharisees' problem is that they actually are really good people on the outside.
Right.
They really are. They're not hypocrites in our modern sense of that word, like that they are preaching the gospel or preaching Judaism and then sleeping around or something. Not at all. They're actually good people. So what is their problem? Their problem is that they have good behavior, but their hearts are not attuned to loving God and loving neighbor. And you can see that they don't love God by the fact that they don't love their neighbor. They oppress people. They reject people. They are overbearing to people. They tie people down with burdens. You can fast forward to Matthew 23 and you'll see a description of how the Pharisees treat people. And so what Jesus is saying throughout the sermon, including in 5:20, is that the righteousness that's necessary for us to be people of the kingdom of heaven is that it's not just exterior, but it's actually a kind of inward godliness as well. Yeah. And so so on the one hand, that's like super challenging. In fact, that's more challenging to us than just saying you have to be super extra holy. Right. Because you and I can work really, really hard, and some people will be super successful at that. But everyone knows if they start looking on the inside of their heart, that's where the brokenness really is. So that's more challenging. And on the other hand, it's very life-giving for Jesus to say that, because he's not saying you have to work super extra hard and be the most holy, super extra people, and it's a competition to be the most holy. Instead, he's saying you need to pause, look inside, and recognize that God sees and cares about your inner person, and he wants to work by his Spirit this true transformation there. And then as that gets worked out, that'll bear fruit in season and out of season. As we grow, it'll bear fruit in behavior. But you can't focus on the fruit without first dealing with the root or the tree, right?
Sure.
And so the answer to how to be truly happy or how to flourish is found in being whole people whose hearts are attuned to God.
And that's kind of then the strategy on that is to go through to I'm trying to not call it manage the sin, but to try and cut that out, and also check out the root that's causing it. I mean, to people that struggle through anger, it's probably not good to come into a place and just scream at people. Okay, so can't do that. That's a clear don't do that. And
you can't just manage the anger. This is the problem. You have to actually start. Why am I angry?
Yeah, why am I angry?
Right,
absolutely. And it's a good point that you can't just go, well, I'm going to think about why I'm angry and I'm still going to go home and kick the dog. I mean, you can't do that. They're done together at the same time instead of only picking this or this. They're in conjunction together.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. The fact that, and I've thought about that just from you talking about it. And also, once again, it's funny that we're doing the sermon too, is at the same time, finding out what the root is. And I found that it took a lot of thought for me to find out, whether it's lust or anger or stuff like that, to truly think about, what is the root. And I feel like it's so, in against what our culture, typically is. It's just do what you feel is right, inside your heart. But to yeah. But to sit down and think, why am I doing this?
Right.
And to attack that, because not only just, managing sin is something that is a lot harder, but also, just letting God kind of expose those shadowed areas of your hearts.
It's kind of bringing those areas to God and saying hey, I'm a mess.
Exactly. Yeah.
But this entire thing is unachievable if there isn't the end of being in eternity.
Right.
And only through God am I able to do any kind of change or justification of anything. So
yeah.
So cool. I just sent you guys, and maybe you can post it somehow.
Sure.
A link to my website and the page there that at jonathanpennington.com that has a bunch of resources, including me doing 12 devotionals for my church on the Sermon on the Mount. So if people are interested in kind of hearing me just teach these things through the whole sermon, I've got 12 8-minute videos where you go through the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, that's awesome.
What you guys are just talking about there too. If you scroll down there, you'll see a couple of videos based on discussion of emotions, because that is something that comes up in the sermon. And how to process our emotions. That's kind of a separate but related topic to what we're talking about. That we've got to start looking inside and paying attention to these things as well.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll have the link on the screen right there, guys, for all of you listeners.
You're editing. Yeah. And now, as far as teaching and preaching goes, do you carry a specific kind of Bible? Do you, or a word choice that you prefer
for preaching?
Or preaching and teaching.
Our church usually uses the NIV. A lot of people, most people at the seminary probably use the ESV, and that's great. I don't know. I find the NIV a little bit more readable and more accessible for the average churchgoer, and it's just something we've used at our church for a long time. And I don't really care what translation I preach from, actually.
Well, I might be able to change your mind with that about not caring. I do have. I'm sure there are some I don't want. I do have, and I think I'm about to bring one of them up. No, I do have a quick quiz. As people come on our podcast to try and kind of create a quick quiz they can go through. And I was thinking, hey, he's very experienced in Sermon on the Mount and the Gospels and all that. So I found a translation of the Bible, and I'm gonna use that phrase very loosely, translation of the Bible. It's an Instagram page called the GZT, the
Generation Z.
Generations.
Okay.
Oh, are you familiar with these?
No, I could just imagine what that means.
Perfect. Perfect. So Caleb's going to read a passage that they have given.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, read a passage Caleb has given. And your task is to identify the passage. I think that you'll be able to do it. Bonus points for giving the chapter and verse.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, first one. Let's see if I can even say this. I don't speak Generation Z very well. I
really don't. Emoji or something?
No, that would be much worse. That's
all right. So number one is chill out, ab later. Later will worry ab itself.
Yeah, so I suppose that's Matthew 6. What verse would that be? Crap, I should know. 21, 20, 24? No, much later on. 19, maybe 32, 33, somewhere in there. What's the verse? I don't know.
Oh, Matthew 6:34.
That is really close.
Yeah,
yeah.
wow, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Dang.
Let each day has enough trouble of its own.
Yeah,
right.
Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious about itself. Yes. Great job. I'll give you a point for that one, just for
I should have gotten that. I did write it
tearing apart the chapter and verse first. That was quite impressive.
I have a feeling you're going to crush the rest of these. All right, number two. Ask Alexa, play hide and seek, and ring that doorbell. Chief stays on the lookout for you.
Okay. That's a little harder.
Yeah.
Are these all from the Sermon on the Mount, or?
Yes, they're all from the Sermon on the Mount.
Yep.
I don't know what that's trying to say. I have some Gen Z kids in my house.
Ask Alexa, play hide and seek, and ring that doorbell. Chief stays on the lookout for you.
Okay, wait a minute. Maybe ask, seek, and knock. So is that what it is? So 7:12 or no, it's right before that, isn't it? 7:7.
7:7.
Yep,
that's the one.
Dang, you got it again.
Ask and it'll be given to you,
okay.
And then seek, you'll find, and knock, and the door will be open.
Okay, there you go.
How they got to ask Alexa, play hide and seek, and ring that doorbell. Chief stays on the lookout for you.
A little loose. You're right.
I know Gen Z people. I've never heard.
It's a little extreme.
Yeah.
Some of I feel like I know a couple people who speak fairly close to this, and that's the sad part about it.
Name them. No. Yeah.
All right. Number three is,
you're 2 for 2 so far. So.
Yeah. Number 3 is, if you only dap up the homies, how you different?
Yeah. If you only love those who love you, how is that greater? So that's 5. 44, 45, somewhere in there.
47, right? Yeah.
7. Gosh,
you're doing way better than I thought.
Yeah.
This is the point I understood I'm getting old, is because I Googled what is DAP. And it is slapping palms as a form of greeting a friend and then holding their hand and pulling the fingers back.
Yep.
I did not know that myself. Thank you.
Yeah. So now I can use that word poorly and be even less out of touch than I was before I tried. So,
yeah.
All right. Number 4.
Don't bring out the mariachi band every time you donate to Chief's GoFundMe.
Nice. That's a good one. So that's in the complex of 6:1 to 21, and it's on almsgiving. So it'd be somewhere between 6:2 and 6:5, I guess. Right. So
Matthew 6:2. Thus, when you give to the trumpet, do not sound the trumpet as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others.
There you go.
So don't bring out the mariachi band.
Yep.
I actually like that.
That one kind of has a, all right.
Yeah.
It kept the tone of it. I mean, yeah. So I'm positive there's a theological problem on Chief's GoFundMe, but something sovereignty of God, something, but yeah.
All right. Number 5.
You're 4 for 4 so far. So
is there a prize at the end? I hope.
we will send you a Chick-fil-A gift card.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A gift card. We'll send your way.
All right. Number 5. If your eye making you trip, yeet it away. Better for you to yeet your eye than for you to yeet.
Nice.
Wait. Okay. Better for you to yeet your eye than for you to be yeeted to hell.
Yeah.
That's hard to say.
Your eye causes you to pluck it out. Yeah. I'm gonna fail you here. What verse that is? I mean, it's obviously in chapter 5, but is it? I don't know. Yeah. In the 20s, 24, 25, somewhere in there.
5:29. Yeah. If the right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. Yeah. This is I'm not positive if I need to encourage using this in a sermon at some point or encourage not using this in a sermon. I don't know. Talk to the kids first and say like, hey, if I say I'm going to pluck the eye out and throw it, can I say I'm going to eat it? And then they'll probably say, no, Dad, don't.
Yeah, I can't quite figure out how to translate eat. I mean, when it's appropriate to use it or not. So for my kids, yeah.
I think it's just not. Like, it's just not appropriate ever. Yeah.
I mean, if this doesn't show how knowledgeable you are on these verses, then I don't know what does.
I was very impressed. Some of those, I was like, there's no way he's going to get that. And you're like, oh, no, 5:47. Nailed it. Dap on the homies. There you go. So
that's great.
So, hey, 5 out of 5. You're a winner. You nailed it. We'll be sure to get you some Chick-fil-A gift certificates. So absolutely. But no, I mean, this has been an absolute honor. There's a couple, if people are trying to find everything that you're doing, where do they need to go in order to check out the podcast, the books, and everything else? Anything you want to plug?
So, I mean, you can go, thanks for asking, you can go to jonathanpennington.com. It's not always entirely updated, but there's a lot of stuff on there. Tons of sermons and videos of me teaching various places and things. Sojourn East, I preach there about once a month or so, sometimes more frequently.
Awesome.
And I don't even know how many times I preach. It's a lot. I'm like the second. And so you can find a lot of sermons there. And then books wise, Amazon, wherever. So I've got a lot of books out. I think we were talking before we started. I've got a book coming out in October of 2020 called Jesus, the Great Philosopher, which is kind of a spin-off of this book but it's written at a different level. It's not a commentary. It's got, Ron Swanson and Steve Martin and Alain de Botton and Plato and Aristotle. And I interact with all kinds of philosophers and cultural realities dealing with issues of how Jesus is really talking about what it means to be a full human and to live a full life. So
absolutely. And that's coming out in October, right?
Yeah. Brazos Press of Baker Publishing, October 2020.
Excellent.
And, So just probably Jonathan. You can follow me on Twitter. I know probably your generation below doesn't use Twitter. And that's okay.
I know that's weird. Yeah. You barely use Facebook. It's weird.
TikTok is the way I should be going if I want to. But Twitter, Dr. JT Pennington at Twitter, or
awesome.
I have a professional Facebook page if somebody's inclined towards that. Jonathan T. Pennington as my personal one. There's like one, and then again, Cars Coffee Theology on YouTube or social media, Instagram. Awesome. I do it all. Thanks to my dog.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's all great stuff too. I mean, I've been impacted by all of it. It's fantastic, and I just appreciate everything that you're doing. So. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Good to meet you guys. Yeah. Nice to talk with you.
Absolutely. Nice to meet you too. Well, Caleb, I think that is going to do it for us today.
I'm Caleb.
And I'm Danny. And we are Nobody Special.